When the P-38 Lightning was first unveiled in 1939, it looked like a time machine that had crashed into the present. It was a total departure from the established rules of aviation. It had twin booms. It had twin liquid-cooled engines. It had massive turbochargers bolted to the outside of the fuselage like exposed artificial lungs. And grouped tightly together in the nose, staring straight forward, were 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon. The engineers at Lockheed hadn't just built an airplane, they had assembled a monster. The P-38 pushed the absolute limits of 1930s technology. It was designed by a 27-year-old engineering savant named Kelly Johnson, the man who would eventually create the legendary Skunk Works and design the SR-71 Blackbird. But the P-38 was his genesis. It was an aircraft born from a loophole. It was a fighter that solved the greatest gunnery flaw of World War II. And it was a plane so incredibly fast that it accidentally stumbled into a terrifying, fatal glitch in the laws of physics. This is the insane engineering of the P-38 Lightning. In the late 1930s, the U.S. Army Air Corps issued a daunting request. They wanted a high-altitude interceptor capable of reaching 580 kilometers per hour and climbing to bomber altitude in just 6 minutes. It was a specification so extreme that almost no American manufacturer wanted to touch it. Furthermore, there was a massive bureaucratic hurdle. The military strictly mandated that pursuit aircraft could only have one engine. But no single American engine existed in the 1930s that was powerful enough to hit those speed and climb requirements. Kelly Johnson realized he needed 2 engines. To get around the military's strict rule, Lockheed used a brilliant semantic loophole. They didn't pitch the P-38 as a pursuit fighter, they pitched it as an interceptor. Johnson filled his sketchpad with wild, asymmetrical designs before landing on a deeply unintuitive layout. 2 massive engine booms and a single central pod for the pilot. This layout solved one of the most frustrating problems in fighter combat: gun convergence. Most World War II fighters, like the Spitfire or the P-51 Mustang, had a massive propeller spinning directly in front of the pilot. Therefore, they had to mount their machine guns out in the wings. This created a geometrical nightmare. If the guns pointed straight ahead, the bullets would fly in 2 parallel lines, making it incredibly hard to hit a small target. So mechanics had to angle the guns inward so the bullets would converge at a specific distance, say 300 yards in front of the plane. But if an enemy plane was 200 yards away, or 400 yards away, the bullets would miss wildly. The P-38 completely eliminated this problem. Because the engines were out on the wings, the central nose pod was completely empty. Johnson packed 4 heavy machine guns and a cannon directly in front of the pilot. They pointed dead straight. It didn't matter how far away the enemy was. If the pilot put the crosshairs on the target, the plane unleashed a concentrated, inescapable buzzsaw of lead directly into it. To get the massive, heavy P-38 up to 580 kilometers per hour at high altitude, Johnson needed incredible power. Compression is the secret to extracting power from an engine. At 25,000 feet, the air is incredibly thin. To burn fuel, you have to force-feed dense air into the cylinders. Most top-tier fighters of the war used mechanical superchargers, which sapped power directly from the engine's drive shaft. The P-38 used turbochargers. These devices recovered the hot, wasted exhaust gases from the engine and used them to spin a turbine, forcing highly compressed air back into the engine. The massive General Electric turbochargers poked out of the top of the engine cowlings like the intake blowers on an American muscle car. But compressing air generates massive amounts of heat. If the air entering the engine is too hot, the fuel detonates prematurely, destroying the engine. You need an intercooler to dump that heat overboard. But traditional intercoolers required massive, drag-inducing air scoops. Johnson, obsessed with reducing drag, took a radical approach. He routed the incredibly hot, turbocharged air through a complex network of tiny tubes hidden directly inside the leading edge of the wings. It was a brilliant attempt to dump heat without creating drag. But as the war progressed and engine powers increased, this system couldn't keep up. The P-38 was locked in a constant, losing battle with thermodynamics. Pilots constantly had to monitor their engine temperatures to avoid blowing them up. But despite its cooling flaws, the P-38 possessed one massive advantage that changed the course of the Pacific War: range. In April 1943, American codebreakers intercepted a golden piece of intelligence. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind the attack on Pearl Harbor, was flying in a transport bomber near Bougainville in the Solomon Islands. The U.S. military wanted him dead, but the interception point was deep behind enemy lines, a 1,600-kilometer round trip from the nearest American base at Guadalcanal. No Allied single-engine fighter possessed the fuel to fly that far, engage in a dogfight, and fly home. The only plane capable of executing the assassination was the P-38 Lightning. Fitted with massive external drop tanks, a squadron of 16 P-38s flew hundreds of miles just feet above the ocean waves to avoid Japanese radar. They arrived at the exact minute Yamamoto's transport broke through the clouds. The P-38s engaged the escorting, highly maneuverable Japanese Zeros. The Lightning was a heavy, sturdy beast covered entirely in metal, capable of absorbing massive amounts of damage, while the unarmored Zeros caught fire easily. In the chaos, both Japanese transport bombers were shot down. Yamamoto was dead. The mission was a flawless success, made possible entirely by the massive fuel capacity of the twin-tailed monster. But the P-38's incredible speed led to a terrifying, unforeseen problem. It was the first fighter plane in history to accidentally battle the sound barrier. The P-38 possessed the lowest critical Mach number of any fighter in the war. When a P-38 pilot pushed the nose down into a steep dive, the plane accelerated rapidly. Even if the plane was only traveling at 70% of the speed of sound, the strange, thick aerodynamics of the wing roots and the central pod caused the air flowing over the plane to accelerate to supersonic speeds. When this happened, the physics of lift completely warped. The center of lift shifted backward, violently forcing the nose of the plane down even further into a terminal death dive. To make matters worse, the sonic shockwaves rendered the pilot's control surfaces completely useless. The stick would lock up like it was set in concrete. Pilots were literally diving into the ground, completely unable to pull up. To fix this fatal glitch, engineers eventually had to install dive flaps under the wings to disrupt the airflow and give pilots enough control to pull out of the dive. The P-38 Lightning was not a perfect airplane. It overheated, and it stumbled blindly into the terrifying physics of the sound barrier. But these flaws existed solely because Kelly Johnson pushed the absolute boundaries of what was technologically possible in 1939. The P-38 was the genesis of Skunk Works. It was the first glimpse of the extreme, boundary-breaking engineering that would eventually give the world the U-2 spy plane and the SR-71 Blackbird. It was a beautiful, flawed, deadly machine that simply arrived from the future a few years too early.